guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another video. Today's video is going to be an update on my RS3, but before I get into that, I figured I should update you on the S3 project because some of you have been asking about it. So rather than try and explain where I'm up to, I figured I would just show you. As you can see, it's not quite going to plan, mainly because the trim that I saw online was not the trim that arrived at my front door. What arrived at my door had perished, half of it was moldy, and I wasn't able to screw it back onto the car like I wanted to, even though I explained that a lot of people will remove those screws. The reason I wanted to do that was because I figured it would be a little more secure. And as you saw from that clip, I tried to use sealant to reattach it instead. And my neighbor even came over and it just didn't work. What you didn't see in that clip was the trim which came with the car. I tried to reattach using Gorilla Glue. And I know some of you are probably screaming at me right now, like, why would you try and use Gorilla Glue? Desperate times. That didn't work either. So I'm not giving up. There is a new set of trim up north, I've been told, in an Audi dealership, so fingers crossed. I have done a lot of work to the car beyond the trim, which will be included in the next update, which is my next video, so stay tuned, there's more to come. We've managed to do a lot, but let's get into this. So a lot of people message me on Instagram and want to know what I've had done to the car. Would I recommend having it done? Who did the work? And do I regret any of the choices I've made? Now, I haven't had that much done to the car, but it's been almost a year now since I began having the work done, and I figured this would be a good opportunity for me to update you on what that year has been like, but also answer some of those questions in one video. So, it's crazy to think it's been almost a year. I guess for some background context to explain why I had the work done in the first place, I began having work done on the car at around 40,000 miles, and a lot of those miles were motorway miles. A good portion of them were B roads and driving around the UK, but a lot of European motorway miles. And I became a little used to how driving the car fast felt, and also the kind of sense of quickness was a little lost on me. So there were plenty of examples of RS3s which had already had some work done out there for me to look at, and I was intrigued, so I figured why not. And to answer the question around do I regret any of the work, absolutely not, because having the work done at that time kind of refreshed the car, and yeah, I just kind of fell back in love with it. And now that I have the S3, I'm not driving it as regularly, so each time I do jump in it, it surprises me, and so on and so forth. So that gets that question out of the way. What I had done is as follows, and I'll put a list in the description below, but it's not much. So I took the car to MRC, who did all of the work, and had a remap on the ECU and the gearbox, and whilst I was there, decided to have the forge inlet pipe and turbo elbow fitted. I then had the forge intercooler fitted a couple of weeks later, and around a week after that I began having a misfire issue because the coil pack had teared slightly. So we fit the revised coil packs, and I also had some new spark plugs as well. And another remap on both the ECU and the gearbox, and that is it. You know, mechanically, in terms of the engine, I haven't done much at all, but I'm happy with what I've had done because that's taken the car up to 539 brake horsepower, 702 Newton meters of torque, which is, I think, is about 570 foot-pound of torque, if my maths is correct, or if I remembered what I Googled. And this car is quick, very quick. I made a whole video about the 0 to 60 times, and annoyingly in that video, the quickest I managed was 3.9 seconds, but if you follow me on Instagram, then you'll know I've got much quicker out of the car. The quickest, I think, is about 3.18, so 3.2 rounding up, which is quick. But I would say after 60 is where this car becomes impressive, because the way it gains momentum is just unreal. I'm hoping to find a runway or something where I can just test it out fully, give it a proper blast, obviously bring you along on that, but anyway. Very quick car, very fast car, and enough for me at the moment. I am considering having more done, but I'll come back to that in a moment. So MRC have done all of the work. The kind of performance upgrades and the maintenance of that is MRC, and then I use a separate company to do all of the general maintenance for the car, so things like changing pads, tires, services, etc. But one of the cool things that MRC offer is, and this is not a sponsored video by the way, is a health check service, which for someone like me is great because, you know, I'm not an expert on these type of things, and being able to take the car back and just ask questions without being judged, you know, is really cool. I want to try and stay ahead of the curve with the work I've had done, and what I mean by that is anything that doesn't look like it should, or anything that could potentially become an issue, let's just change it or deal with it sooner rather than later. So during the car's last health check, we had some oil in the turbo. So they advised that I should look into changing the PCV, which I did, or MRC did. I always want to say PVC, but that's something else. But we changed the PCV, and during the year since I began having the work done, the car has had 2 services and 3 oil changes. The 3rd oil change was a little random. I just decided I wanted it done, and I've covered around 10,000 miles, various driving styles. So no problems so far, touch wood. But what I have had done in addition to the performance upgrades to the engine is the brakes. I made a separate video about the brakes, which I'll put somewhere. You know, the brakes have been great. The diameter of the disc is the same size as OEM discs, but this is a 2-piece floating setup. I'm also using DS2500 pads. Both have been great, cannot fault them. Vagbrem Technic setup, which has been good. It looks really good as well, which again, for a non-expert, is enough for me. And then also I changed the tires as well to Pilot Sport 4S's, which it sounds so small, but it's made such a big difference to how the car handles in all conditions. So some of you will know, if you're still using the Pirellis, that they are a fantastic tyre as long as it's sunny outside. If it's raining, then, or you know, with the driving I do around countrysides, etc., I was losing traction and the car was travelling a lot in corners. These just really, just all-round great tyres. Cannot recommend them enough. And I think, you know, would I recommend MRC? Of course. I don't think they need my recommendation, but I would. They're a great company. They're almost kind of synonymous with VAG, and particularly RS3s. As I mentioned, there are a lot of examples out there and a lot of MRC examples that I could look at. But also just going back years, looking at old RS4s, etc. Like, they've just got a lot to show. And funnily enough, the guys who do all of the like general maintenance of the car, they had some cars that had been worked on by MRC, so there was a bit of a kind of relationship there as well. So yeah, cannot recommend them enough. I don't regret any of the decisions I've made. Like I said, it completely transformed the car at the right time for me. I think things to consider if you're, you know, thinking of the same thing, is if fuel is a deciding factor, I probably wouldn't do it, because you do inevitably use more. I can't give anyone an exact figure. I get a lot of questions about fuel. is difficult because without sounding blasé, I just don't really pay much attention to fuel. But what I can do is give you a rough estimate. So before Corona, I was doing I think it was like a 50-mile round trip per day. So 200 miles per week, because I was only going to the office 4 days of the week. And then maybe an extra 50 or so miles on average over the weekend from, poodling around town, whatever, going to see friends, getting coffee, blah, 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 blah. And I was spending anywhere between 80 to 100 quid a week. So, that gives you a rough idea. Some weeks obviously more, depending on how I was driving to work, or how much driving I was doing at the weekend, but that gives you an idea. But like I said, if fuel is one of the, I'm not sure if I should or shouldn't, I probably wouldn't, because you're going to use more. There's no two ways around it. And the other thing is just, keep on top of the servicing, keep on top of the oil changes. Whenever the car goes back to MRC or the other company I use, I always ask them to check for fault codes, particularly in the haul decks, just to make sure there's no issues there. Because, and again, this is just based off of an understanding I've gained from reading forums online. Sometimes issues within the haul decks don't present themselves as and when. Sometimes it takes a little while for them to get bad before you realise, but the fault code would register before. I don't know, but again, I'm just trying to keep on top of those things. V-Power wherever possible. I did switch to Momentum for a little while, but I had a bit of a bad experience. I asked a question online, had some issues with the car on idle. It was kind of a bit spluttery. Someone suggested it could be a bad batch of fuel, so yeah, back to V-Power, and that's it. I think overall, cannot fault this car at all. I think having the work done has made it harder to know what to replace this with. I seem to bounce around cars a lot. I spend hours on Auto Trader looking at cars. It's become like one of the things I do before I go to sleep is just and that's mostly because the car is so capable. It's a small car, it's really fast, it handles great. And I know nobody is going to think of an RS3 as a sleeper, but the fact it looks standard, it's funny when you'll get like a Golf R or something else, like an A45 or whatever, that tries and then realizes, oh, hang on a minute, something's different here. And yeah, I just love it. So that is my update. Subscribe if you haven't already. Do like the video if you enjoyed it. Dislike it if you didn't. Leave me some feedback. I'm always open to it in the comments down below. And until my next video, guys, peace.